family, it's me, Queenie Brown, author, speaker, and founder of the Self-Love Movement. And today I want to share a little something that's more intimate. I want to go into a little detail about the pain that I endured on my journey towards learning to love me better. It started out when I'd say I was about 24 or 25 years old, and I started to notice that my memory was slipping. I didn't fully understand what was going on, but I started to have an inability to focus, and when I was trying to concentrate on something, I would be distracted very easily. And that wasn't consistent with my past, so I didn't really understand what was changing in me. Of course, when I talked to people in my world, they kept saying, girl, that's just stress. Usually when you're under stress, it causes you to have issues with focusing. So whatever, I dismissed that. Then I started to have insomnia, and then headaches started to come on. And I didn't know what was going on, of course, and I just kind of pushed through it. Well, years passed, and I would have bouts of those here and there, but it wasn't consistent. So I got to where I was about 28 years old, and then the symptoms started to come on really, really strong. I started to have muscle spasms really bad, and I didn't understand what was going on. And every time I would go to the doctor, they would say, well, you know, Miss Brown, you're probably under a little stress. Well, you know, Miss Brown, you're just under a little stress, and if you deal with the stress in your life, then you'll be able to overcome these muscle spasms. And I'm thinking, what the heck am I stressed about? I'm happy. I'm in a relationship. We're doing well. Financially, we're doing well. I don't have any real bills. I'm not stressed. So it didn't make sense. I couldn't reconcile what they were saying with my life and equate that to stress. And so it started to get worse. The muscles started to tighten up, and I started to have shooting pains in those muscles. And then I would go to the emergency room. I think at one point I was going to the emergency room at least twice a month, sometimes more. And the doctors would give me a shot of Demerol or a shot of muscle relaxer or something to try to help me to calm my nerves or whatever it was, and to help me relax. And they kept telling me, you know, it's stress. You need to go ahead and deal with whatever stress is in your life. And I continued to dismiss it. Well, then the panic attack started. I had never experienced terror like I did when I had my first panic attack. And all I can remember is just panting and wheezing and not being able to get enough air. And I just felt like I wanted to run. I just wanted to take off my clothes and just take off running. And nobody could stop me at that point. I didn't understand why I wanted to do this. I didn't understand what I was trying to get away from. I didn't even know what was a panic attack. All I knew was that I needed to run. And if any of you have ever had a panic attack, you know the terror that you feel. And it's oftentimes there's nothing triggering it. It just automatically comes on and you're just in terror. And that's how I started to feel every now and then. And I can even remember having panic attacks in my sleep. And there's nothing more terrifying than waking up and in a pool of sweat and just wanting to run and not even having a reason for it. It's really unsettling. So, of course, I spoke to the doctors about the panic attacks. They told me it was stress, and I dismissed it. So, after that, I started to notice that my lips started to itch, and this is really strange. But my lips would itch, and so I would scratch them and everything, and then eventually they would blister, and then they would crack. And you can imagine how unsexy that had to be. But they would crack, and then they would scab. And after they would scab, if I would smile or anything, it would cause them to crack, and then they would ooze, and it was just disgusting. It was just horrible. After that, they would burn, and I didn't know what to do. Of course, the doctors kept saying stress is stress is stress, and, you know, whatever. Well, eventually, I was diagnosed with TMJ, and that's when you clench your jaws really tight at night. Sometimes you even chomp on your teeth at night, and it's a stress reaction. And so what had happened was I was clenching my jaws so tightly that they literally locked up on me, and I couldn't open my mouth wide enough to even bite a burger. I think my mouth would only open like about, less than an inch wide, and that was it. When I went to the doctor that time, I went to the dentist, and he was showing me some exercises that I could do to help strengthen or release my muscles in my jaws. And he talked to me, and he was saying, you know, Miss Brown, I understand that you have talked to doctors and you've had all these symptoms, and they all come to the same conclusion that stress is your issue. Well, until you do something about it, this is only going to get worse. You're going to continue to see different types of symptoms, manifest because you're not dealing with the problem. And it wasn't until he said that I said, okay, fine, what do I need to do? And so he said I needed to talk to somebody. I just needed to make an appointment with a therapist and just start talking and sharing my story. And in doing that, it'll help to release whatever it was that was inside of me. So I surrendered at that point. I mean, if I can't buy the burger, we got a problem. So I started seeing a therapist. And it wasn't until I was able to hear myself tell my story that I realized that, wow, you know, maybe there is a lot of stress in my life, and maybe I have been holding on to a lot, and maybe I've been stuffing my emotions, and maybe I've not really been as attentive as I needed to be to my own emotional well-being. And as long as I continued to ignore it, then my body was just going to continue to try to tell me over and over and over again. So I realized that there were a lot of things that I had repressed in my life. There was a lot of abuse that I had endured. There were a lot of painful situations that I was involved in. And one in particular, I had not verbalized to anyone in my life, and here I was almost 30 years old. I had never acknowledged or verbalized the fact that I was molested at 9 years old. And I'd always remembered it, but I had never had it. I can't really explain how that, I've never acknowledged it or verbalized it or told anyone. And so it was almost as though it didn't exist. And when I was in therapy, I got the courage to tell my therapist about it. And that was the first time that I had acknowledged. I hadn't even told my husband. So during that time, it really helped me to reconcile the pain that I had lived through growing up and the pain that I had caused on my own as an adult. Different choices that I made that were both painful to myself and to others. I was still a lot of unforgiveness that I was dealing with. I hadn't forgiven others, and I also hadn't forgiven myself. It was just a lot of stuff that that I didn't realize that was just a part of me, a part of my baggage that I was carrying around every day. And so I stayed with my therapist for 2 years. And honestly, that was the best decision I could have ever made, because it forced me to see me differently. It allowed me to get the courage to look at myself in the mirror and like me, because I didn't even realize at the time that I didn't like me. So the interesting thing, though, is it wasn't until I left the therapist that my symptoms got worse. And so I was, after I left therapy, I remember, and the reason I left therapy was because I switched jobs, and she was no longer covered under that medical program. And so, of course, I didn't want to start over with someone else, so I just said, I think I'm good. You know, I've been through this for 2 years. I've dealt with the issues. I'm good. And that was not the case. So it wasn't very long after that that the muscle spasms got so much worse. They got to be so much worse. And they literally started to get so tight that my neck and shoulders got so tight that it literally, this is how I walked around every day, because these muscles in here had gotten so very tight. It was like I was a bodybuilder, and I couldn't turn to the left or to the right to even drive my car. So now my doctor, he put me on disability, and he said that I needed to get my body back on track, because it was really going into some major spasms at the time. So at this point, I had constant pain in my neck, constant pain in my back, and the tighter my neck got, the more the nerves that were flowing through those muscles would be pinched. And if you've ever had a pinched nerve, you know that it's like a shooting pain that goes straight through your body, and it's startling, and it's excruciatingly painful, and it's something that you immediately want to do whatever you can to stop the pain. Well, imagine both of these muscles in my neck and my shoulders were so tight that any nerves that were flowing through them were being squeezed constantly. And so they would squeeze, and then the nerve would fire, and the muscle would squeeze, and the nerve would fire. And it was like a constant, perpetual cycle of pain. And the only thing the doctors could do was inject me with muscle relaxer, pain medication, and anti-inflammatory. So now I'm getting injections in the muscles in my neck and in my shoulders and in my back.